Cast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our February 3rd Thursday webinar. I'm Margot Hoffman with the Partnership for Excellence, and on behalf of the California Council for Excellence, the Oklahoma Quality Foundation, Partners in Performance Excellence Northwest, Rocky Mountain Performance Excellence, the Sterling International Program, and my program, the Partnership for Excellence, we welcome you to our webinar. We're very excited to have Kay Kendal and Glenn Bodinson with BaldrigeCoach with us this morning. So before we get started, I have a few announcements. First of all, if you look in the pull-down screen, there's a place that says materials. We have uploaded a copy of the presentation along with 4 handouts that will be referenced during the presentation. So feel free to download those documents so that you have them during the presentation and to take home with you. We are also recording this webinar, so you can get a link to it to review it later as well. During the presentation, if you have any questions, we ask you to submit them in the question box, and you can also access that from your control panel or possibly the pull-down screen, depending on what you're seeing. Before we get started, I want to remind you that all of our programs have activities going on throughout the year. And so we hope that you will get engaged with the program that covers your region. And you can find out what's going on through these links to their events pages. And one event that is coming up that we want to remind you of is the National Quest for Excellence Conference. There will be great best practice sharing sessions at that conference. You will get to hear from the award recipients from the 2025 Baldrige Award, which we're hoping to hear about sometime within the next day. And there'll be also some pre-conference workshops. So we hope you can join us at the Quest for Excellence that takes place March 29th through April 1st. We'd also like to thank our organizational members. We couldn't do the work we do to promote performance excellence if it weren't for the support from our organizational members. So if you're an organizational member to one of our programs, we are very appreciative of your support and the work that you do to help us sustain. I would now like to introduce you to our presenters. We are going to hear a presentation on QAPI. It's not just for long-time care anymore, or as Kay and Glenn are calling it, QAPI on steroids. I'd like to first introduce Kay and Glenn. Kay has more than 20 years of quality executive experience leading large-scale change initiatives across diverse industries. As CEO of BaldrigeCoach, she currently works with organizations on their journey toward performance excellence. Kay served as a panel of judges for the Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award for 3 years, and she continues as a master examiner. She was a master examiner and team leader for the ACA NCAL Quality Award Program, and she was also a judge for the VA's QAPI Award and judge for PIPEX, the Baldrige-based program serving Massachusetts, New York, and Connecticut. She has served as a technical editor for the Baldrige program, as well as several Alliance program, and is a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt. Glenn Bodinson founded BaldrigeCoach in 1989 to help organizations become more productive, profitable, and fun places to work through the power of performance excellence. Glenn's experience includes service as a Baldrige Master Examiner and Texas Quality Award Judge. He was a judge for the VA's QAPI Award and a Master Examiner and Team Leader for the ACA NCAL National Quality Award Program. Glenn is a Six Sigma Black Belt and a Shingo Prize Examiner, and is also a Fellow of the American College of Healthcare Executives. Please join me in welcoming Kay and Glenn.
Thanks, Margot. So we want to welcome you to this presentation, QAPI on steroids. And I guess we'll just dive right in. And Glenn's going to try to transition QAPI from being strictly related to healthcare to something that's applicable to almost any industry. So, advance, please.
So, thank you, Kay. And I don't want people to get hung up on the term QAPI, Quality Assurance Performance Improvement. What I really want each organization to think about is your need for continual improvement. I don't think at any time organizations, whether it's government, nonprofits, or for-profit, where we've been asked to do more with less resources. So productivity improvement and continual improvement are really important. And the topics that we're going to be talking about today and the tools are things that not only help you hold the gains, but also some of you need to meet performance standards. And the QA part of this is really about making sure that you're meeting those performance standards, knowing what to improve, and continually improving your processes. Next slide. So the topics today are Kay asked me to turn off my camera, and I'm trying to figure out how to do that.
On the bottom.
Yeah, okay.
Got it. Now the slides are bigger.
Okay. So basically, QAPI stands for Quality Assurance Performance Improvement. And if you just substitute continual improvement or your performance improvement system, that's really what this is about. And one of the examples I like to use is think about the thermostat on the wall in the room that you're in. The thermostat kind of has two different functions. One of them is to maintain whatever temperature it's set at. And that's really what quality assurance does. You have a performance standard. I've set it at 72 degrees. It's going to detect if it's too hot, too cold, and if it's outside of certain limits, then it'll turn on either the air conditioning or the heating system. But there are other times when maybe Kay will say, Glenn, I'm cold. Would you please turn up the thermostat? So then I go over and I change it from, let's say, 72 degrees up to 76 degrees. That is a different type of request on the system. That's what performance improvement is about. It's where your current standards are not sufficient and you really need to take them to another level. Kay will be talking a lot about the background and some of the improvement approaches. We'll talk about internal sources of data and data collection tools.
Next.
Okay.
So let's talk about the background of QAPI. It was a requirement of the Affordable Care Act of 2010, and it was aimed at any organization that was receiving Medicare or Medicaid reimbursement. And so, as it says here, the dual focus was to improve the quality of care for the residents and to reduce costs. And so it was a merger of two complementary approaches. Quality assurance had always been a requirement of healthcare organizations as part of their regulatory environment. But this added the performance improvement aspect to it. So it was a mixture of reactive and proactive approaches. And again, as I said, for healthcare, there's been a regulation for quality assessment and assurance for many, many decades. Next. But it really was a shift in long-term care. It really threw a lot of folks in that industry for a loop because they were not used to having to be proactive. They weren't used to using the data that was available to them. They weren't used to performing really robust root cause analysis. And so you can see some of the other things that performance improvement required that had not been part of their normal QAA. Now let's compare and contrast with the next slide. if you see here, quality assurance was really, again, compliance. It was required. It often had a focus on when something went wrong, the question was who did it, not what system is not working properly. What do we need to do? The other thing is quality assurance was the responsibility of a very small quality assurance committee. And QAPI really encouraged organizations to include frontline staff as part of this effort. It also looked at prevention approaches rather than just managing by exception. So let's talk about the next aspect of QAPI that really was a big difference. Outcome measures are the bailiwick, if you will, of quality assurance. They tell you how you've done. So they're lagging indicators, and you're doing it by driving by looking in the rearview mirror. So QAPI requires you to identify leading indicators that are predictive of the performance of your outcome measures. So let's look at the next slide and take a look at some of these outcome measures that are not just part of healthcare. What could you identify as some possible leading indicators for any of these outcome measures? And just put that into chat.
Feel free to put things in the chat box in response to this slide.
Oh no, Margot, I fear that they have not been sufficiently caffeinated.
It looks that way. Or they're thinking really hard.
So Glenn's got a couple of examples of leading indicators. I'm going to ask him to share those. Maybe that'll spur some ideas.
You know, one of the groups that we worked with was the Boy Scouts, and we worked with the Merit Badge group, the group that writes the pamphlets, the handbooks, those sorts of things. And they were having a problem with that bullet late deliveries. So we did a lot of data analysis of projects, and what we learned was that the late projects all had a common cause, and it was because the projects were not started on time. So previously they had been measuring, you know, was it delivered on time, and they changed their measurement to is the project started on time. And over time, the on-time deliveries were approaching 99, 100%. Therefore, they actually made the leading indicator of starting projects on time as what they were going to measure, rather than just the delivery.
We do have one that someone typed in. They said a leading indicator of customer complaints could be late deliveries. So they were looking at one of these could be a leading indicator for another one of these.
Absolutely.
That's a good observation.
Yeah. So sometimes these are chains. One of the other things that we learned from one of the Baldrige quests for excellence was, from an education standpoint, one of the real leading indicators of future success, not only in school, but in terms of jobs and incomes, were students able to read at the grade level in the second or third grade. And the students that were able to read at that level were much more successful in terms of graduation rates, in terms of income and job success, and the ones who failed to read at the grade levels, they actually had a fairly high correlation with incarceration. So there are some other leading indicators. So let me just ask those of you that are thinking about it, use the chat function and just chat in a couple leading indicators that you all might either be using or need to use.
Go ahead and move on.
Okay, let's go on to the next slide. So your performance improvement system, your continual improvement system, may have a number of approaches. Some of you might be using Plan, Do, Study, Act. Now, I prefer to use Plan, Do, Study, Adjust, and the reason is most people don't know what ACT means. So you're planning an improvement, you're doing whatever action steps are required, then you're studying to see if the improvement that you wanted has happened or not, and if not, then you're making some additional adjustments. To make is a Six Sigma term for define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. And some of the people in Six Sigma like to get really deep into these statistical terms, but you don't really need to. For most cases, you can just think about, okay, how do we define this process? How do we measure it? And then analyzing, is it meeting its expectations? If not, how do we improve it? And then one of the most important things is, once you make improvements, controlling that. You can also have quality improvement committees. PIP stands for Process Improvement Projects. Think of it like an action plan. It's an improvement action plan, PIPs. And it builds on improvement that are strategic and inclusive. Now, when we say QAPI, think of your own performance improvement system. So don't get hung up on the term quality assurance performance improvement, but think about what is your system for continual improvement, what is your performance improvement system, okay?
On the next page, we're going to talk about one of the things you can do, which is actually continually improving your performance improvement system. So Margot, if you'll advance, thank you. There's a completed simplified self-assessment that's one of the handouts that Margot posted as part of the materials. And let's just talk a little bit about this. Even though the word QAPI is in this assessment, really make sure that you think about your own performance improvement system when you use this. One of the things that we did was CMS, which has developed just an amazing set of resources for quality improvement and process improvement. But their self-assessment is about 6 pages long. So we developed an assessment that's a single page. What we encourage you to do is, if you go to the next page, Margot, is get your team together, your leadership team, your quality improvement committee, however you manage performance improvement in your organization. Get the team together and first individually fill out the assessment, and then share your assessment with the rest of the team. And the 2 areas that we ask you to really pay attention to are those that are low rated by most of the team members, and also those where you have difference, where somebody is saying we've just started and someone else is saying, oh, I think we're already there. And you need to understand what is causing the discrepancy in the viewpoint of folks about your performance improvement system. And then once you've identified those top 2 areas, what are the barriers to you in making those changes? So let's look at the next slide.
And while they're doing that, if it's helpful, if you're doing that self-assessment, if you want to have it retyped, the form, and take out QAPI and put in the name of whatever your performance improvement system is, and use that for the assessment.
One of the things that QAPI did, compared to just QA, is CMS really emphasized the need to involve frontline staff. And many of you already know that. You involve the people closest to the work. But in order for frontline staff to be engaged in this, they need data, they need time to focus on data analysis and process improvement, they need training on those skills, and then they need recognition for their involvement. So Glenn's going to involve you in an exercise.
I don't know what this is.
Okay, one of the things that we've seen is that there is a challenge to involving people closest to the work. Why is this a challenge for you? Put that in chat. Anybody?
Not seeing any messages in chat at this point.
One of the things that we hear a lot from our long-term care clients is they can't take their caregivers off the floor to participate in QAPI meetings in a conference room. So I'm going to ask Glenn to talk about one of our clients and how this very accomplished and skilled administrator handled this challenge.
As Kay said, the issue was the kind of the model a lot of organizations you'll read about in various publications is, okay, you're going to create a high performance team. You're going to teach them all these quality tools, and they're going to work on making improvements. But in long-term care, the staffing levels are so thin that they really can't take the CNAs and RNs off of the floor to work on an improvement project. So what they're doing is they're looking at their employee survey results and looking at the performance of the various departments and then identifying problems. They're going out and talking with the staff, stand-up meetings and huddles, and finding where there are issues and what some of the barriers are to them accomplishing their jobs easily and efficiently. And then the senior leaders are going back and taking that information, and they're working on coming up with a solution rather than having the team do it. And then they take the idea for the improvement back to the team and propose that and make any adjustments. Then often what they'll do is they'll do a small test of change. So they'll test the improvement in one area, learn from that. That's the study part. Maybe make a few other adjustments, and then they get it implemented. Now, one of the other things on the next slide,
Glenn, before we go on, we did get some responses to this.
Great.
So one of them said time was a challenge. Another person said everyone already knows everything, meaning people close to the work get defensive. And another comment was for participants, different folks have different learning styles and participation comfort levels. Training on meeting rules and roles is a great first step, or at least one-to-one conversations with folks not used to this participation.
Good input. Thank you.
And all of that are things that require kind of unique solutions in your organization. And basically, one of the things that Mary Greeley has done from the CEO level is tell everybody they have two jobs. One job is doing their work, and the other is improving the way their work is improved. And one of the ways to get the staff engaged is by having some numbers. And on the next slide, you'll see an example of, here is a huddle board, and what you'll see there is this is for at a department level, and the organization at the top level has 5 priorities around quality, safety, delivery, financial, and engagement. And what they're able to do then is track their organization's performance. The next slide, what we'll see is another example of visual management. Now, this is a case, and the data is a little bit old, but it's really a good example where they have worked with preventing falls, and they were tracking how many falls they had by day, the week, and shifts. So you can see there, over time, the red is 2012, the blue is 13, and the green is 14. So you'll see that in the evenings is a lot of the falls, and also on Mondays at nights. So by tracking this and making it available, it really engages the workforce in making improvements. Next.
Okay, let's talk about, on the next slide, I saw this a while ago and I thought it was really perfect because a lot of times people are not using the right tools to give them the information they need to make improvements. And so they spend a lot of effort, but they get 0 results. Now, the next slide is an eye chart, but I want to decode it for you. Down at the very bottom of this slide is a link to the CMS resource guide of QI tools. And on the right-hand side are hot links. So if you look at the various things that you're trying to do, which is on the left-hand side, and you want to have some tools available to you, these are hyperlinks, and it's really easy to click on them. And I want to don't often give kudos to government entities, but CMS has really developed a broad set of tools. If we can move on. And we're going to go over some of those tools because these are tools that are really helpful and are not restricted to just being used in healthcare. Now, on the next slide, it just gives you this is the design for what they call the QAPI elements. If you go to the next slide, which again at the bottom of the slide has a hyperlink to all of these hyperlinked tools, they've just really created an amazing set of tools and templates that are available publicly. And like I said, you don't have to be in healthcare for some of these to be applicable. So let's look at the next slide. We're going to talk about these 4 specific tools available on the QAPI website. A prioritization worksheet for process improvement projects, a goal-setting worksheet, a worksheet to create a charter, and then just a measurement and indicator collection and monitoring plan. So the next slide, if you look at this worksheet, I want to explain it because I'm a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt, and one of the things I found in my role as that is a lot of people have math anxiety. And with this math anxiety, some of the tools are very intimidating. And I want to point out, and hopefully you've downloaded this particular form as one of the resource materials. But if we just walk across it, the left-hand column is your brainstorming list of all the possible areas that you could launch an improvement project on. The next column is the frequency at which this issue arises in our organization. And if you look across the top, there's not a very complex or sophisticated rating system. It goes from 1, very low, to 5, very high. So in terms of prevalence, if this is something that occurs frequently in your organization, you probably rate it a 4 or a 5. The next column is risk, the level to which this issue poses a risk to the well-being of our residents. You can substitute your word customers for residents. The cost incurred by our organization each time this issue occurs. Somebody earlier said that a leading indicator for customer satisfaction could be late deliveries. So think about the cost that's incurred. It may be you have to have expedited shipments. Maybe your customer imposes a penalty on you. But whatever that cost is, and again, using the simple rating system above. Relevance, the extent to which addressing this issue would affect customer quality of life and or quality of care. Responsiveness, the likelihood an initiative on this issue would address a need. Feasibility, the ability of our organization to implement a process improvement project on this issue given current resources. And finally, the continuity, the level to which an initiative on this issue would support our organizational goals and priorities. And then the simple way you identify the prioritized opportunities is you just across any given row, tally all of the scores that were given and come up with a total score.
And Margot said earlier that time was one of the issues that had been put in chat. Well, one of the ways that you deal with time is by setting priorities, and this prioritization worksheet is very helpful in selecting things to work on that are most important.
And again, it's simple addition. As a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt, I've been exposed to a variety of ways to prioritize improvement projects, but I've never seen one as simple and as engaging a larger group of folks to help prioritize. One of the things that's really nice about this, we talked about involving frontline staff. Well, frontline staff can weigh in on this, so they don't just have a priority handed over to them to make this happen. They can participate in identifying an issue as being a high priority. The next form that I want to share with you is a goal-setting worksheet. Now, one of the things that I really like about this four-part, it's on the next 3 slides that pass this, is it really breaks things down into very concrete terms. So for instance, in this specific, what do we want to accomplish? Who will be involved? Where will it take place? Next slide. Margot, if we could advance one. Thank you. How you are measuring it. Is it attainable? Is it time-bound? So a lot of you right now are already realizing that this is part of SMART goals. And Glenn has an even simpler way of describing how you set goals in a way that communicates a lot of information. So on the next slide.
So there's 2 ways, as Kay said, SMART goals or 4-part goals. Having a verb, what you want to improve, how much, and by when. So in this case, it's improved resident willingness to recommend from 55% to 70% by June 30th, 2026. So that is measurable. What happens in a lot of organizations is they'll have just a general goal, but it's not measurable and it's not time specific. So how do you know if you've reached that goal? And this is why we want to do it. So either using this 4-part goals that are measurable and time bound, or the SMART goals, which is on the next slide that Kate has just covered. So let's go on to the next slide then, Margot, please.
I don't know how many of you actually charter your improvement teams and improvement efforts. I'm a huge fan of formal chartering. It really helps a team stay focused and to understand the why of what they're doing. So if we look at the next slide, you'll see part of the template that CMS has provided. One of the things I really like is the project phase, because we have a lot of organizations that even create an action plan, but they wait until the final milestone to evaluate whether they're successful or not. But if you look at this phased approach, you can see that you have different milestones where you can monitor how you're doing and make course corrections if needed. On the next page, you can see that we identify barriers, we get approvals, and we identify the people who can approve in advance of the effort being taken place. I had a problem one time when I was working as a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt, where the project was a very cross-functional project. And it wound up that 3 VPs thought they all had to approve the project. And the executive vice president told them, if you can't work this out among yourselves, and it has to come to me, what do I need you for? Which was a pretty harsh message, but he was right. It was, if the 3 VPs cannot collaborate and agree that they're going to approve something for the best interests of the organization, not just their department, that there was a problem there. And so sometimes you want to have that conversation early on, or you will definitely frustrate the team when they present their solution and they cannot get it adopted. The other thing I want to point out that isn't on this charter form that I would add is in scope and out of scope. And I'll give you an example of out of scope. I was working with a team on trying to reduce the cycle time for initiating a design project until the design was ready to be implemented. And part of the problem was that they were coming up with technology solutions. And what they did not know was that there was a new ERP system that was going to be implemented in the middle of their project. And so the IT department was not entertaining any requests for changes in their current IT systems. Now, had that not been put out of scope, the team would have felt very frustrated when they came up with an elegant IT solution and were told it wasn't on the table. So anything that you know about, this is where the project sponsor really has an important role in knowing a higher level of what's going on in the organization and knowing what might be off scope, out of scope for the team, and giving them that information up front before they do a lot of work. Okay, the last tool that I want to talk about, that's also one that Margot posted in your resources, is a measure, indicator, collection, and monitoring plan. And I've given you an example of a completed as well as a blank one. And one of the things is, if you're going to be measuring and collecting data, you want to make sure that there's an indicator that has an operational definition. And one of the examples that I like to use is a bad example from when I worked in aerospace. Our biggest customer was Boeing, and we were getting constant complaints from Boeing about our late deliveries. And we were measuring our on-time delivery, and we thought we were running at about 90%, 80 to 90%. And Boeing said we were running at 50 to 70%. So the first thing we had to do was understand what's the difference in how we're measuring. Well, what we were measuring was if Boeing ordered 10 items and we delivered 9 of those on time, we gave ourselves a 90%. Boeing measured delivery in terms of what they called fill rate. So if they ordered 10 items, they needed all 10 items to complete an aircraft. If we delivered 9 of those 10 items, they still had an aircraft sitting on their manufacturing and assembly floor. They gave us a 0 unless the complete order was delivered on time. So that was a huge learning for us in making sure that when we said, what are we measuring, make sure that we get the right definition and agree on that. This whole plan really is helping make sure that you're always looking at the same apples to apples, and you're not arguing about what the data shows because you agree with it. The next slide shows an example of a completed monitoring plan, and you also have this as part of your handouts, so you can see how it's used. So Glenn's going to talk a little bit about how do you find sources of data.
I'm just thinking about this. Some organizations don't have a whole lot of data, and others have so much data they don't even know what to use. And as Kay was giving the example from Boeing, that you really want to understand, first of all, what your customers' requirements are for your products and your services. And again, that doesn't matter if you're in a government organization or for-profit or not-for-profit. You really want to understand what the customer's requirements are. You also get some feedback from your staff, and you also have, certainly a lot of accounting and financial data, but in most cases, financial data is really kind of a lagging indicator. The real power in data comes from processes and understanding how your processes are performing. And there's 2 types of process measures. One of them is the output measure. How did the process perform? But to the extent that we can find in process or leading indicators, that's going to give you a lot more leverage. On the next slide, this is a case where you can chat in some of your relevant comparative data, and just knowing, for example, that your call light response is averaging 5 minutes. How good is that? Well, part of it depends on your resident satisfaction survey data. Are they satisfied with the call light response? So part of it is the process, but also part of it is looking at comparative data. It may be inside or outside of your industry, and so you want to know how good your performance really is. Next.
I want to, before we move on from this topic, I just want to give a plug for a freely available source of comparative data, and that is the Baldrige application summaries that are freely available on the NIST Baldrige website. You can look at recent Baldrige Award recipients, and even if they're in a different sector, you may find that they have some processes that are the same. So for instance, one of our recent Baldrige Award recipients was Northeast Delta Dental, and they have a call center performance that has actually been cited in several publications as being best in class. We introduced them to another client of ours who has a call center. Totally different industry, but a call center is a call center is a call center. And you can find other sources of comparative data outside of your industry in those Baldrige Award recipients. Another one is unplanned downtime of your IT systems. That's reported by many of the award recipients. So if we move on to the next page, this is just a cautionary tale. We have a lot of clients that use the word benchmark inappropriately. They substitute benchmark, and what they really mean is that's a target, that's a goal, that's a result they hope for. And if you go back to the Baldrige definition of benchmark, and what the term really means outside of many industries is It's processes and results that represent the best practices and best performance for similar activities, inside or outside an organization's industry. So for instance, our long-term care clients that often use it incorrectly, this is something where they say, we compare our results to the benchmark. And I always ask them, what is the benchmark? And usually they tell me it's what they hope to achieve by a certain time. And that doesn't spur improvement. So let's look at the next slide. And here's ways that I've been very successful in using comparative data and benchmarks to accelerate improvement. Challenge the status quo. Sometimes your people think they're already performing at high levels, and they think that because they don't know how others are performing. You need to demonstrate what is possible. They may think that they're doing the best they can. Adopting best practices for breakthrough or innovation and celebrating a quick win. I have another example out of aerospace where we had formed a team to work on turnaround time of our warranty and repair items that were sent back to us. We were running at about 45 days. When a customer sent something back for repair or overhaul, it was taking us about 45 days to send that back to the customer. We had set an internal goal of reducing that in half, so getting down to 22 days within a 3-month project window. What we soon found out by doing some comparative shopping is we had competitors who were already returning their repair and overhaul items within 15 days. So even if we put in a lot of effort and were able to cut that 45-day return in half, we still would not be competitive. And so that second bullet of demonstrating what is possible really, really challenged us. So let's move on. I have certainly felt like this hamster many times in my career. And sometimes we're chasing improvements, but part of the problem is prioritization. Now, I showed you a tool earlier in this section, a prioritization matrix that you can use. Just on the next slide, I want you to think about right now, how are you currently prioritizing? And we're not going to spend time on chat because I really want to show you a very powerful tool that some of you may be familiar with and some of you may not. So if we move to the next slide, we'll look at the Pareto chart. Now, I don't know how many of you know why it's called a Pareto chart, but in the 17th century, Vilfredo Pareto was a Venetian economist. And his research showed that 80% of the wealth in Venice was held by 20% of the people. And so you can see that there's a lot of leverage in this. In this case, we're looking at delivery and what are some of the problems with delivering something on time. Well, no signature. That's the number one reason. And if we could fix that problem, we'd already eliminate nearly 80% of the problems our customers experience. But when is a Pareto not a Pareto? And I see this a lot. On the next slide, I'm going to show you an example. And I say it's when it's a flatato. And if you look at this, it's just a stacked bar chart. But there's no leverage here. You would have to get down to the fifth cause to hit 70% of the defects. And in the meantime, as you're checking off each of these causes, your customers are getting more and more frustrated with you. So I want to talk about what do you do if this is your first effort at using a Pareto chart and it doesn't show you anything that gives you leverage. So let's take a look at 3 months of falls data. This is, again, part of the long-term care industry, but it could be if you are in an environment, a manufacturing environment or some other environment where you have OSHA issues, you could use the same type of approach. So let's see what happens when we first gather the data. It's just a bunch of random numbers, and we don't know what to do with it. So let me show you the next chart. So Margot, there, thank you. So this is just a partial data set, but we had 100 observations of falls with major injuries. And one of the things that we did was we segmented the data. We segmented it by shift, by day. We broke it down by time of day in 2-hour blocks, by location in the resident's room, and finally by location in the center. So let's take a look at our first Pareto chart on the next slide. So this is looking at falls by day of the week. And if you look, the first time we get up to 70%, we're looking at 4 of the days of the week. So again, no leverage. Let's take a look at the next one. Let's take a look at the next one, please. Okay, falls by time of day. Now, this one was an interesting one because by involving the frontline staff in brainstorming some of the causes of the falls, they suggested that there would be more falls at shift change. They suggested there would be more falls at meal times, at medication passes. They had a whole bunch of ways that they thought falls might be influenced. But again, no leverage. So let's take a look at the next one. Okay, so here was by location in terms of in the room, where were residents falling and getting injured. And you can see that there are 2 heavy hitters by the bedside and in the bathroom. And why does that make some sense? Well, they're trying to get out of bed unassisted and they fall. They're trying to make it to the bathroom unassisted and they fall. So those are 2 things that this center could certainly work on. So the next chart tells us, bingo, we now have something that we can attack that is likely to make significant impact with just 1 or 2 very focused efforts. So I want to point out a couple more resources. I didn't realize this until I was working on this presentation, but used to be in Excel you had to have an add-in. They have now made Pareto charts one of the default graph types in Excel, and there's a link to it. So no more manually creating your Pareto charts. There's also some examples and instructions that are available on the ASQ website. So let's take a look at the next few charts on Paretos. Here's a check sheet where you gather information, a simple check sheet. One of the things that we found is that data collection is something that frontline staff actually are proud of doing. They're keeping track of it rather than someone else monitoring them. So a simple check sheet is easy. Now let's look at the next chart. Sorry, the chart after that. Frequency of defects by day of the week. So you can see here, again, we have no leverage. What if we look at number of defects by defect type on the next chart? No leverage. Now take a look at the final one, where we looked at the defects prioritized by the frequency of occurrence, and what you can see is that defect number 10 and defect number 7 are the overwhelming majority. But this is just a stacked bar chart. Let's convert it into a Pareto chart on the next slide. And again, you see the same thing, that by looking at the comparisons, 70%, you're getting not 70, but close to 50% of all your defects by just focusing on those top 2. Now I'm going to ask Glenn to wrap it up.
I think what Kay has just demonstrated is the segmentation of data, and I think she used to work for somebody that talked about torturing the data until it,
Bludgeoning.
the data until it told its story. So the segmentation, when you take the data, you can look at it and keep looking at it different ways with different segments until it gives it. Now, in terms of next steps, have your senior leaders and staff complete the simplified QAPI self-assessment. And again, I would probably change the word QAPI in that to whatever language you use internally for your performance improvement system. And then begin looking at how you prioritize and plan your improvement projects. And Kay showed you a really good tool for prioritization. And one of the things that we've learned over time is, and I had an experience at Marlowe Industries one time when I was working with them. They called me in because they were having a lot of problems in one manufacturing area. And we filled up 2.5 pages on flip charts of the issues that they were having. And we went through a prioritization matrix similar to what Kay showed, and we picked one issue that we were going to work on resolving. We did the root cause analysis and worked on the improvement plans. Once we got that done and the project or that one area was a success, we then came back and put up the 2.5 pages of issues. And the team was really surprised, and I was too, that over half of the issues were solved by just prioritization and focusing on that one improvement project. So we talk about performance improvement projects. You can think about that in terms of action plans. And on the last slide is our contact information. And Kay mentioned earlier that there's a lot of resources on Baldrige applications. So I encourage you all, when you have questions about use of these tools, where you can get data, which Baldrige applications, feel free to either email Kay or me or both, and you have our cell phone numbers there. We learn from your questions. We want to help you be successful, and we want to acknowledge Margot and your organization for having these webinars. We really appreciate the opportunity to participate and share with you, and we just would like to hear from you all about how you're using this tools, or when you hit a snag, reach out to us and we'll help you get past it.
So turning it back over to you, Margot.
Thank you, Kay and Glenn. And we got a comment in the question box that said, "Well done as always." So I really appreciate you both sharing your knowledge today. You provided a lot of great tools for our participants to take back and apply in their work that they do. And I can't agree with you more, Kay, about using the Baldrige applications. I was putting together a presentation on risk management this week, and I used 4 different Baldrige applications and the best practices that they use for risk management in my presentation. So I fully support your comments about that. Does anyone have any final questions for Kay and Glenn before we share our webinar for next month? Feel free to type them in the chat or the question box. Okay. Our March webinar, we have Debbie Collard, who is going to be presenting on achieving leadership excellence using the Baldrige Excellence Framework. And there's a link here that you can register to attend that. And I will also send it out to all of our participants today. So we hope you can join us for that webinar. And then we also just want to thank all of you and remind you, if you're interested in starting your Baldrige journey and are looking for your contact in your regional or state program, here are the people to reach out to. that will get you started. So we always welcome folks to get started using the Baldrige framework. And you just saw through Kay and Glenn's presentation the power of using it. So thank you all for joining us. We hope to see you next month, and have a great rest of your week. Bye, everyone.